I'm June Wideman. I was executive assistant to Scott Deeser, who's chairman of First Financial Bank Shares. I was born in Wink, Texas. My folks lived in Kermit. My dad was a pharmacist and my mom owned a flower shop, but there wasn't a hospital in Kermit, so I was born in Wink, home of Roy Orbison fame. My dad worked for Magnolia Oil Company. He was a pharmacist and he also worked for Magnolia. So some of the men that he worked with thought it would be funny to put an orange poisonous snake in the back of his little coupe, which he drove for work. And it would be funny that it would scare him when he saw the snake. So weeks went by and he never said anything, and he was the best dad, and he always took me to the movie on Saturday. We'd go to the Saturday movies. So one day I ran out ahead of him to his car and opened the door, and that snake was laying across the seat of the car, which scared me to death. So I've always thought that God has a wonderful sense of humor, that he would marry me to the snake man as it turned out. In the 50s, women didn't go to college to graduate, and this was 55, 56. So I came back to Midland and went to work in the secretarial pool at Shell Oil Company. So got close to December, and Tom was senior class president and senior class favorite, and he thought all of the co-eds were waiting for him to invite them to the Christmas dance, but apparently they weren't. And my cousin was a student at Sul Ross also, so she said, well, my cousin might come and go to the dance with you. And so he said, great, ask her to come. So that's how we met on a blind date. In the 50s, it was a different world. And I have a picture on this first date I had with Tom, and for some reason I have my hand on his knee. Well, girls didn't put their hand on boys' knees at the time, and I'm sure he thought, wow, I have a live one here. So maybe he liked me because of that, but I straightened him out on that right away. Sweetwater is famous for many things, but among them is the Rattlesnake Roundup. And Tom and his friend Bill Ransberger started the Rattlesnake Roundup, and we had a great idea that we were going to take a bunch of snakes to Fort Worth to one of the buildings down there, and people would come and we would make a lot of money. So we took a lot of snakes down there and not one person showed up. So we found out that Fort Worth was not interested in them as much as Sweetwater. But Sweetwater has, it's put Sweetwater on the map, and after 55 or more years, every year they still turn in 2,000, 3,000 pounds of snakes. Tom just was interested in it, and he was very adventurous, and he was active in it up until his health just didn't permit him to do it anymore. Loved it, always loved it. He was such an interesting person, and we were interesting in our own right. Each of us brought something to it, and we always said that the secret to longevity is that one person, it doesn't matter which one, but one person has to get up and leave the house every morning and go to work. And so as it turned out, I happened to be that one. We decided to move from Sweetwater to Abilene, and I applied at First Financial Bank. They had an opening for a secretary for Mike Brooks, who was president of the bank in 1984. And he had been through 5 secretaries. So when I came on board, people were taking bets about how long I would last at the job. And in 1987, he went away on a skiing trip. I had come on board in December, so we got to do my annual review before he left. We said everything we wanted to say about how much we enjoyed working together and what it had meant to us. And he died on that trip. He had a heart attack and never came back. So I've always thought how wonderful it was that we got to say what we meant to each other. But then after that, I worked for Scott. I worked for Bill Crumrine. I worked for Mr. Murphy. And then when Mr. Murphy went upstairs to be the chairman, he asked if I would come and work with him there. So I went up and worked with Mr. Murphy for a while. And then I retired when I was 65. I thought, well, that's the time you retire. But Mr. Murphy wanted to know if I would keep working, so I worked 7 years as a temporary for Mr. Murphy. And then when he retired, Scott asked me if I would stay and work with him. So I went to work with Scott and worked with him till I retired again. And there was an article in the paper that the headline was with my picture, "Will June Wideman actually retire this time?" But I did. My son played tennis in high school, and after he graduated, he played tennis in college. But that's how I got interested in tennis, was his interest in it. And then as I began to watch Federer, he, as a young man, resembled my youngest grandson so much that they could have been brothers. So I got interested in watching him. A lot of tennis players play tennis like it's a boxing match, and Federer plays it like it's a game of billiards, just light. He moves light and does that. So I saw on Facebook that he was going to do an exhibition at Madison Square Garden against Grigor Dimitrov. So I told my daughter, I said, "Kelly, we ought to do this." And she laughed, said, "I'm in." So I said, if we're going to go see Federer, we are not going to be up in the boonies. We're going to be where we could see him. And when we got to Madison Square Garden, that kept taking us down and down and down and down. And we wound up on the first row behind the players' benches. And Kelly said, "Wouldn't it be awesome if that's Roger's bench there in front of us?" And in a little while, a person came in with his big red RF tennis bag and set it down. We had made signs, Kelly had made signs with perfect, Roger's perfect, and my mom is #1 Federer fan. And we fought with those things on the airplane so that we could get them to New York, and took them with us to Madison Square Garden. So the guys at the bank knew how important it was for us to see Federer, so they said, "Well, we'll watch, and maybe we can find them up in the stands somewhere." So every time the camera would come over to Federer, there we were right behind him with our signs, and ESPN filmed the exhibition match. So I do have a copy of that film, and when it was over, he walked over to me and took his match headband off and handed it to me. And luckily I didn't have a heart attack at the time, but my daughter said, "Roger, my mom has a Roger Federer jacket. Would you sign her jacket?" And he said, "I watched it the whole match." And people around us were going, "You're so lucky. Get him to sign your towel." But he was such a gentleman, and his people, I know, wanted him to come away. But he stayed. He signed autographs. He went around to the other side, signed autographs. He was just a splendid gentleman, just like he is. But I didn't have a heart attack, and it was like being struck by lightning. To me, First Financial is a family. Just working with Scott and working with the people that I was fortunate enough to be with. It's just, as I said, when I was finally 81, I said, "Scott, I think I need to retire." And he said, "No, we're keeping you alive." I'm humbled, very humbled by the honors that I've received, because I don't think of myself as that special. When you take a job, it doesn't matter if someone asks you to go get coffee or to pick up a package or a paper that's been left somewhere. That doesn't define the importance of your job. It's how well and how delighted you are to do it, to have the opportunity to do it. I love each one of the people, and when they do well and when the shining stars come, we're just so excited for them. And it's such a blessing to work at a company that appreciates the employees and tells them so and shows them that they do. So I'm just as proud of them today as I was the day I walked out.